mean, I had, like I said, knew all these red flags, knew all these things, but I coped with it by like, that was so Hollywood. Like I was like, let me just focus on what I can focus on. That was just
Yeah.
so Hollywood. And it was like a movie. Oh my gosh. And it really was. I mean, totally like a scene out of a movie. I feel like I've seen my birth play on a show before, but
I'm Petra. I had a vaginal birth after 3 cesareans. I'm a VBAC doula and birth educator, and I feel called to tell you that you deserve the birth experience that you want. I want you to join me every week to hear empowering birth stories, heart led conversations, practical tips, evidence based information, and yes, we definitely dive into the woo side of things too. My hope is for you to leave each episode feeling inspired and informed. Thank you so much for including me on your journey to be back. Now let's get into this episode. Hey, so I just wanted to preface this episode with letting you know that I had to put this into a two-part episode. One, just because Lizzy and I got carried away in conversation. Two, because she has two very different VBAC stories. So one was a VBAC in the hospital and the other was a free birth at home. And they are just both so very different from each other that I felt like they each needed their own episode. So I really know that you're going to enjoy this episode. First, you're going to hear her VBAC in the hospital story. And then next week, you're going to get to hear her free birth story. So please stick around. There is just so many amazing nuggets in here. Lizzy is just so knowledgeable and she is also a birth worker. So, I mean, it's just so good. I enjoyed this conversation so much, and I know that you will too. Okay, we have another amazing story that I cannot wait to hear myself. This is going to be so incredible. I have Lizzy. Lizzy is, at the time of this recording, a 27-year-old Georgia mom of three. They are 4 and under, and she is a wife to her high school sweetheart. I love that. She is a history geek, intuitive birth advocate, and human rights activist. Oh, so important. And her passion for birth work stems from her negative and traumatic experiences that occurred during the birth of her first two children. So, Lizzy, thank you so much for joining me today. I seriously can't wait to hear your entire story.
thank you so much, Petra. You know, I listened to your podcast, if I believe with my first feedback, which was my middle child. I mean, if it's 2022, I'm not sure if you had it, but I know for sure I listened to it my last pregnancy. And so I just want to say thank you publicly for just taking the time to give the space to women because I know one of the things I'll probably talk about a lot is I'm a big anecdotal evidence person. That's not the only place I go to, but stories is what changed my journey, listening to other women and realizing like literally I'm not crazy for wanting to do the things that I want to do, or I'm not crazy for like feeling grief for what I've experienced or whatever, you know. So I just, these places are so sacred and so needed, so thank you. um
Ew, oh my gosh, you make me want to cry. Ah, I'm so glad that that has been a space for you that you have liked to come. So thank you for that.
Yes. So yeah, quick backstory. I went through like a short infertility, 2 years, but it was a really, really hard 2 years before I got pregnant with my first. And like even before that, I kind of had like some crazy experiences with birth control and just like my whole journey with my womb. I'm now called like myself I have this thing called the Womanhood Project. So I really try to focus the womb. It's like a WOMBAN, like woman, but with the B in it, womb. Okay. So womb is like my big thing. And I just feel like my womb has been through so much. And so at one point, my IUD was embedded into my uterine wall, had to get that removed by surgery. Right. And that was just like, even though it's not the end of the world, but it was just like not something you expect to go through at like 21 years old. Right. And then I went through this infertility, get pregnant at the height of COVID in 2020. And um, I I want to highlight too that I'm a plus size woman. And so a lot of my mindset, a lot of where I was coming from going into my pregnancy, going into really anything in my life, I've kind of dealt with, you know, outsiders being, you know, having their fat phobia. I mean, we all have a little bit of misogyny. We all have a little bit of everything. Like no matter what, you know, you go take one of them tests, it'll tell you. But, you know, specifically through my own lens, I really would even tell myself very like ugly negative comments and kind of limit myself due to my size. And so I had watched home birth videos, like I had watched free birth videos. There was this Facebook group called BirthTube, and I think it's inactive now, but it used to have like all these just raw birth videos, and I was obsessed watching them during my infertility journey. But there was something in the back of my mind telling me when I got pregnant, I remember even looking up like a home birth midwife locally, and I just said, like, I can't do that. Like, I can't do that. Like, it's like I think part of me thought it was illegal. Like I do know there's like weight limitations in certain places around the world. Maybe I had heard that, or maybe I saw something, but I just totally said, yeah, home birth, I can't do that. Like I love watching it, it's all cool. And that's kind of where that was my relationship. I thought I believed I could birth my baby. I did. My mom had always instilled that in me. My brother was 10 pounds. And so she always like just made, and then she did two of her births unmedicated. She had a precipitous labor. She had all these different experiences that she would share with me that made me believe like I could totally do it, but like there's just society won't let me, is
Hmm.
probably what I, just would, whatever. I was so controlled by other people. I was a people pleaser. And I think so many of us women stem from that. And then you go through these experiences like, I will never, like, I'm not doing that again because it traumatizes you.
Yeah.
When you do that in your pregnancies and births, if you decide to do everything for other people, you get lost. So but at the same time, despite me having this like romanticized version of home birth and just omitting myself from it, and that's not why you should do home birth, by the way, people. And I'm glad I didn't for whatever reason. I was thinking like, oh, it looks cool or whatever. But I I simultaneously loved the surveillance, and I don't say that in even a negative way. It's like constantly getting ultrasounds. I got lots of ultrasounds in that pregnancy. I didn't love like the biophysical profiles, and like I got a lot of NSTs and things where I was constantly strapped down. It's not that I love the being strapped, but like I did like seeing my baby, as a first time mom, as a mom going through infertility. And I will say I do know, like a part of the communities that are affected by birth trauma largely outside of like women of color, being obese, plus size is affected too. People that have went through infertility is they have a higher level of birth trauma. And I mean, there's probably lots of reasons for that. People that went through IVF, anybody. And so, and I think it's because largely in that experience, I would do anything for my baby, and I still would, but I just wasn't educated on this hierarchical birth system, right? Um, and so going through this pregnancy, I like again, it was COVID, so I didn't really get to even see all these people that I was around, trusting, just putting trust in, putting faith in as I and society we're told to believe. We're told to trust doctors and we're told to trust police. And not that we shouldn't in some circumstances, but I just threw it all out there without a second thought. And um simultaneously I couldn't even if I were to see these people in public, I couldn't recognize them because they all had masks on. And like that's another, I think, just a layer of looking back on it that makes it like kind of, oh, you know, hard to know. But just I don't know, like not that I would see these people or like whatever. It's just knowing that I didn't even get to see their faces. I couldn't recognize them. And they got to touch me and I allowed them to. And so yeah, the COVID thing definitely added. I was not really as much afraid of getting sick as I was like stressed out by every appointment. You'd have to wear the mask, get tested, like you would get your temperature, and then and I get it, like whatever. But it was just that's a lot. When you understand physiological birth and the like moving forward, you like see that's like a lot under the psyche, the layer that we're not thinking of, our subconscious brain. So um I even doing all this test, like I said, my doctor, she was so at some point I developed like elevated blood pressure, and I have my different theories on like they were using the robotic cuff, which is not great, especially if my arm is like the size of someone's leg, honey. Like it, you like And in my future pregnancies, I never had that issue before. So, I just have my thoughts on it. Was it really like high blood pressure? Was it like white coat syndrome mixed with like whatever? But can't do anything about that.
Right.
That being said, um I guess with my size, they didn't say anything to me, but because I have this understanding, I guess semi understanding of what it's like to be bigger in the medical field or in life, um, I guess it made sense that they were doing everything. Like she never sat down with me, and this is one of my problems is the lack of communication that happens between patients and doctors is that um a lot of people don't understand. Even if I went, which I did go home and Google and like research a little bit, but I was also still so confused. So I never had someone sit down and say, look, you're having elevated blood pressure. Here's like X, Y, Z, whatever. It was just like, go take some medicine and send you on your way. And I took the medicine because I was too scared to like not, which is, it's fine. Uh, but where was I going with that? I guess I was going to say that, my assumption it just made sense that because a bigger woman like me, they're going to do more tests. They're going to do this. Like, of course, I'm high risk. Like, of course. And so we did like 24-hour urine dips where I had to take a big jug home and like pour my pee in from the toilet it was crazy.
Wow.
Um, yeah. And I get there's a time and place for that, but I don't know. It was just a lot, but I did it all. And I give you all the backstory to say somehow in the back of my mind, I knew I didn't want to be induced. And my mom had went to like 42, 43. She went very far with all of us. And so again, in one of my bigger beliefs, like I believe I can birth a big baby. I believe I can birth unmedicated. I was like, I believe I don't need to be induced. I can go to 42 weeks.
Hmm.
And I don't know, I just was too disconnected, like I said, from this hierarchy of birthing in the medical system. Um, so I go to like a 34-week appointment, and I actually had not seen my doctor for a while because, like, I don't know, she was in a birth one appointment, she was sick another, like, I don't know. I just didn't see her for 3 or 4 appointments. And this first appointment back seeing her, she tells me that we will induce at 37 weeks. Like, that's just like, that's what she says. Like, she's like, well, evidence says we need to induce at 37 weeks. And I just like bust out crying. And I immediately felt, and I'm kind of like shaking. I'm not going to cry right now, but like my body has a reaction, like you just have to, because going back in that moment, you could just feel it.
Yeah.
Um, I knew she was going to give me a C-section, or I just knew I was going to have a C-section. I just felt it. Like that was the loudest. I mean, to this day, that my intuition has just screamed like almost like a megaphone. It was so weird. Um, and I just cried in her office or in the room, uh, telling her that's not what I wanted. And she just kind of said, well, with the risk factors. And that's finally when I was like, okay, well, you gave me what I probably was looking for. Like I was thinking this, but you hadn't said it. Well, now you tell me, like, well, you got all these risk factors, and she didn't go through them.
Mm.
She just said pretty much what I was thinking. So I took it. And for the next 2 weeks, because I was, like I said, I was 34 weeks, and my days would start back on Friday. And this was like a Monday. So I had like 2.5 weeks till the induction. And I go home and I just do all the things. I finally do all the things. Well, I didn't really research much about induction. I mean, I might have watched a couple YouTube videos about like, I don't know, breathing exercises or something, but I ordered red raspberry leaf tea. I was like, doing the deed, like walking. I will say I was like, that was my least active, which I had no kids at the time, but I was like, it was my least active pregnancy. So and I was pregnant all summer too. So I was like, oh, so
Yeah.
I definitely didn't prioritize movement the way I should have for sure. And so I finally start busting my tail going up and down my driveway for like a week or two thinking like this is going to get me dilated. This is going to just do all the things. And I don't know. Because I just thought, this is my destiny. I'm just going to have to go through with this induction. And yeah, so 37 weeks comes around. I will say I was really proud of myself. I did advocate, like all the things I researched to a degree, I guess, because your baby's always tied to you. So the things that are happening to you in many ways are directly tied to your baby. But like I had researched, okay, for instance, she had never mentioned giving steroid shots before. Because, yeah, I would have been 37 weeks. That's still people, we have misconceived the thought that 37 is like safe. Many 37 weekers go to the NICU. You know what I'm saying? So I advocated for steroid shots like the week before, and I got or a couple of days, I don't know how, whatever. And I had like researched, all the procedures he would get. I would research, and I had been doing that all pregnancy. So I was always focusing on him in many ways. And just not, what impacted him on the way to get there. Like I mean, I knew I didn't want an epidural, but I didn't know how that impacted his physiology too. And I am very like neutral about epidural, but I think it's important to know how it impacts you and your baby. And
Yeah.
I didn't know that, but there was many things I had looked into. So anyway, so if you look up the cascade of interventions, that's how my induction went. When I had watched The Business of Being Born after the fact and
Hmm.
saw that, I was like, oh wow, that's actually literally what happened to me. And it solidified, my experience as well. Um, and my doctor was, I want to say, like, she was always nice, like had a good personality. And moving into my second story, I could say that's why I actually, between all my births, it's well, my last birth was the least traumatic, but like between my first and second births, it's the least traumatic out of both of those because, you know, I realized like I have a lot more empathy for doctors and midwives and all of them now than I did at one point. You kind of
Yeah.
come into it with a lot of anger,
Yeah.
rightfully so. And just because people are kind of sucked into a system that sucks them dry, and I feel so like my heart hurts for them because I know people do not go into it wanting to hurt other people, but that doesn't mean it's okay. But like looking back on it, it seemed like um, I was able to see that there's just this system of liability. And that's what I mean by this hierarchical birth system I keep referring to is that at the end of the day, patients' autonomy and like respect and all of those things are not the top of the chain. They just aren't most of the time. And I'm really at a place where I'm not even trying to be us against them. I'm so over that. Like, dude, I'm like, because I've been there too. I've been a part of that conversation where I'm like, oh, knives and pitchforks. Let's bring
Yeah.
out the pitchforks. And
Hmm.
I'm honestly like, I can't even do that anymore. But we have to just call a spade and just like, what can we do moving forward to support women and be honest about all of it. Um, so yeah. So when I was able to just see what it wasn't, I mean, it still hurt, but moving into my next experience, which I could spend forever talking about, but I'm gonna try to be quick on this because, like I said, it was my most my second experience was the hardest one, and I'm just learning how to like not like minimize it, but it's I could sit there and call out like 50 details that just feel so massive to me. Like there are big things. They're not little, but it's like I don't have to do that to prove my point. I'm still in the healing phase. Like I need people to hear me, and I know it's important, but anyway, my point is that I can get kind of crazy. So if you ever want to like, stop me, feel free. I know because yeah. So going into my second birth, I really, well, first of all, ignorant old me, I thought it took 2 years to get pregnant with my first trying every single month. I knew for a fact I wanted a VBAC going for my next child. I knew I wanted another child, but the one thing I knew going into VBAC was that a lot of providers wanted you to be like 9 months postpartum, so that way your births were like 18 months apart. And I otherwise I had not like I knew I wanted feedback. Like I knew on the table I wanted feedback, but I hadn't researched much because postpartum it was all triggering. It was all so hard. You know,
Right.
I actually didn't even watch The Business of Being Born until I was pregnant with my second. And so it was basically, I think I was 10 months postpartum when I got pregnant, but it was 9 months when I was finally like, okay, we did not start trying, but we were just like, if it happens, it happens, whatever.
Yeah.
And so it happened. And that was shocking. I was like, I mean, I know, like, duh, you have sex, you have a baby, but like, I guess, prior to the experience, I just did
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
So we lived in South Carolina at the time. That's where my first was born. And I knew, so like, I knew enough, like, for one, to get pregnant at 9 months or whatever. And I knew enough that I wanted a home birth this time. I was not going to like willingly go into the hospital. But researching like early pregnancy, you cannot hire a licensed midwife to be with you at home. And that's the only, so I will say again, going into this, I can't keep putting myself in boxes. And I think we do that. So the box I put myself in the first time was, okay, you can only have a hospital birth. The box I put myself in the second time was like, you can only have a licensed midwife when they're actually, there's just so many more options. Now, birth center is not an option in Georgia, or it might, if it is in South Carolina, there's no birth centers that were close to where I lived or whatever. And so I just was like, okay, there's a licensed midwife that lives really close by. We lived on the Georgia South Carolina border. So we just moved back to Georgia. Like we had lived here before. So
Hmm.
I moved to Georgia so I can hire a local midwife. That was, I think, the woman I had researched in the last pregnancy. And I just was like, not for, can't do it. So now the funny thing is I would tell people, I remember saying this because it's just I would say it so often. I said, I don't care who supports me or who doesn't support me. I will birth my baby in my backyard.
Mm.
Now I did not stick with that time. I did the next time, but because so I would say these things, but I would also like go against it. Now the difference going into this one, so yes, I was putting myself in this box, but I was going into it starting to research. Like I started going, like I was going crazy. I was like, let me do my mindset was let me do what I can to avoid the last experience. And so I thought, that was hiring a licensed midwife, which like statistically, yes, that does lower your chances of all those extra things. But that was kind of my like I feel like the only reason I did it was because I thought that's what I was supposed to do.
Hmm.
And this is the birth that really pushed me into like, oh, I found out what I believed and what I didn't believe and what actually is important to me and what's not important to me. Um, but it took a lot of pain to get there. And so I went into it like watching every documentary. I was buying documentaries that like you don't even see people out because I would go on Reddit looking, I would be like, is there any feedback stuff anywhere? Because there's not much. I mean,
Yeah.
and I joined every group and I
Right.
listened to every podcast. I just like me, it was just me and my son. He was such an easy baby. God bless him. He's my easiest
Hmm.
baby of them all. And that's the one that tricks you. But as they say, I mean, love my other two, but oh,
Of
he was just
course.
a baby that just,
Yep.
man.
Made
Anyway,
you want more. You're like, if they're all
yeah.
like this, I'll take five more.
And the two next two, while they are crazier, I still, like we said before we got on the call, I'm like, I might have more one day, but so
Yep.
I I was really sick this pregnancy too. I wasn't as like the first pregnancy, not so much. So I actually like in the process of moving and just like being sick, taking care of a 1 year old, I kind of kept pushing my midwife appointments back. So I had like hired her at 5 weeks and didn't see her till like 18 weeks. Which I mean, there's really nothing going on the first trimester anyway, but
Right.
by the time I knew that it was important. I guess the one thing that was important to me, besides like feeling like I had to hire somebody, I will say I was concerned that my blood pressure, like about that whole blood pressure situation. So that never ended up being a situation this time, which was great. And that was kind of, what got me to like finally get back into to go to the appointments. Cause honestly, I really didn't feel like there was any, I mean, just looking back, I was like, that was the only thing I really needed, which I could have bought my own blood pressure cuff. That's neither here nor there. That's just I'm giving kind of my thoughts looking back. But anyway, so I start going to these appointments, and this is when I start to get to know them. So I go this whole trimester not knowing really well, and I would say these people, because I thought one person, I thought I was hiring this main person, but she actually had a student that I didn't, I guess if I didn't know about, whatever, it wasn't sure was going to be a part of my care. So it ends up being a team that does my care the whole time. And as I get to know them, I mean, simply put, even though I'll talk about more things, simply put, we weren't a good connection. And
Mm.
also, I really did not understand that in a similar fashion of obstetrics, midwives, if they're licensed, they have a level of protecting their license. They will go further lengths, sure. A lot of them will fudge due dates, like they'll do things. But at
Right.
the end of the day, it's their livelihood. And I hate
Hmm.
that. I hate it so much. I just didn't, I kind of thought that's nothing's going to happen to me. Like everything's going to be fine and whatever. But even before, so I ended up going to 42 weeks, which is like, was the kicker, but things were happening before then. So, this is where I feel like even highlighting the plus size experiences. I mean, even though, anyone could go through this and many do. Blood pressure wasn't a problem this time, but it became fundal height and blood sugar.
Mm.
And my blood sugar was fine. I don't even know, because I could go through all the red flags, but just long story short, she constantly had this like freak about what I was eating. Made me do my blood sugars, even though they were fine for the 2 weeks. There was like one high reading, and that's because I ate Mexican. Okay.
Hmm.
And I remember her being like, "You can't have Mexican anymore," and that's it.
Wow.
And she never said you have gestational diabetes. She
Hmm.
like if someone's gonna, I was reading Lily Nichols, just real food for
Yeah.
gestational diabetes. She had a library. I was checking out these books. And also taking responsibility here. I was doing the things for me totally, but I would
Hmm.
go into these appointments like letting her know I'm doing all the things. Like, look, I was like, I listened to this podcast, and I wanted to prove myself that I could do it. And she even said in our initial meeting, because I met her when I interviewed her, that she prefers VBACs to be in the hospital.
Mm.
So I didn't think about like I have that on record. So I don't. It took me like 2 years after the fact to like look back at that, and be like, well, duh, like what are you? She does not feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I think her last VBAC patient before me was a placental abruption 4 years before it. I've done some digging. So, trauma will do that. I've been like this investigator trying to figure this stuff out. But so other people's trauma can come into your birth, and that's usually what happens. And I really think one day I want to talk to her. I've really just I still think about it all the time, to the point where I really want to have a heart to heart with her and figure out like whatever. That's probably 10 years, maybe never in the future. But
Yeah.
so blood sugar, and that was also with a plus size woman, by the way. And I don't know if that has anything to do with it. I know the woman that happened with. So, I don't know. We can all make assumptions. But my point
Right.
is there was like it was the blood sugar thing constantly making me test, but never told me I was gestational diabetic. Although I was not calling myself gestational diabetic in my head, but I was also saying like, well, again, they're making me do it because I'm bigger, whatever. I'm just going to do it because I know I'm healthy. I had confidence knowing, like, I really felt I was taking control of my pregnancy in ways, you know, I was exercising all the time. I was drinking, well, I was eating so healthy, like despite being so sick. I was sick the entire pregnancy. I actually was hospitalized twice for the flu. I had the flu for the first time in my life. And then the other time I was hospitalized for, oh, food poisoning. So it was like really rough. And I felt really proud that I did all these things. Well, then what creeps up on top of me just taking all this blood sugar stuff constantly was my fundal height. Now, keep in mind, at the time I was like 280 pounds.
Mhm.
I also have lost 100 pounds before that. So I have loose skin. I have a huge belly. Fundal height is not, it's just, and I had my doctor before had not done that because I was getting ultrasounds all the time. So that was actually something I was not prepared. I was like, not thinking fundal height was going to like risk me out. Well,
Right.
that becomes a fundal height became a cascade of interventions for me personally. So
Hmm.
it led to me going to an MFM. Um, my baby came out under 9 pounds at 42 weeks. So I don't know if like he was totally fine. And even at the MFM, he was measuring fine. And I just remember thinking, this is so silly. I ended up hearing from two different doctors at this MFM that my baby would float in my abdomen. My doula was there with me listening to the whole thing. And it was, um, it was just all for nothing. I mean, it was all silliness. And like I said, there's so many, I have a birth story in my own podcast, like, and I plan to revamp it one day with like different details and different reflections looking back now if anyone wants to check that out because it's way more than like the little things they're not little but
Right.
it goes into I didn't get my home visit because that's that they scheduled they called the MFM. They scheduled it for the day of my home visit where they come to your house and do all the things and like sit there
Right.
and go through the protocols. And I promise I've tried to like not be like woe is me, but it's just too it just feels it sucks. It sucks
Yeah.
feeling that way. It sucks feeling like you were trying to get rid of me and people, so then the next so I leave that the MFM appointment. There was this whole other thing about them saying they thought my son had a fatal heart condition, which they had no evidence to back this up.
Oh my
And
gosh.
again, no, like I wish I was making it up. And that caused me panic attacks. I was like 36 weeks pregnant. So that was what
Oh,
caused. So, because when I went to the MFM, they were supposed to just do a growth check, but they did another anatomy scan because I already had one. But that came out fine. Then the scan came out fine. It was just the midwives trying to conjure up something, and whatever. And so they sent me back to the MFM. So I went twice. And that's when I got that talk like, well, your baby's probably going to die in your abdomen from you having a VBAC. But no, his heart's fine. They were like,
oh,
no, his everything. Yeah, they were like, everything's fine. And I remember going there thinking, I don't know why I'm here because
right.
I know he's fine. But so it kind of just, even that was like, I'm going to a high risk doctor and they're saying his heart is fine. What are you talking? Like they were just pulling stuff out
Yeah.
of their butts. And it was so traumatic. And I remember calling my friend in Alaska, like just it would be like I'd be like early in the morning and she'd be like 6 hours behind me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot you're like just waking up, but these midwives are just um
Oh,
and you know, so after the crazy your baby's gonna die appointment, the doula I had hired, so she went with me, my doula went with me. I'd asked the midwives to go, they didn't, even though I was scheduled to be with them that day, they did not
right.
go. The doula goes with me. Now the doula I had hired her because she was like she was also doing birth assisting with those midwives. So
Oh,
she was a doula, but she would also do like the birth assistant, like you pay like someone $300 to like clean up the aftermath. They come at the end, right? So
yeah.
she would do that also, but not at the same time. Those are not two, she would do those separate.
Got
And so
it.
I hired her as my doula. I hired the two midwives. And then I did hire another birth assistant with the different, I'm not names, but like I know who she is.
Yeah.
I knew it, this is the team. So
Yes.
keep this in. This is important for the birth. Okay. Because I'm gonna try to go through this part and then like, because this is the hard part. So
Right.
after the crazy appointment, my doula says, because she knows these people, obviously, she works with them. She's like, do you want me to call the midwives and tell them what just happened? And she was a really good doula, by the way. I like don't have a lot of issues with her, but just know that's important. Anyway, so she was like, do you want me to call them or do you want to? I was like, in my mind, I was thinking, they don't believe anything I say, but I was like, no, you just call them. So
Mm.
like, so she calls them and, I don't know what they say, but my next appointment, they hug me and say, I'm so sorry you had to hear that. Mm. And I'm thinking, I don't know any midwife in the last 8 months I've been researching that doesn't have a clue that a MFM or any doctor is going to tell a VBAC mom that she's making a poor decision. I mean, it's just very rare, and I
Right.
live in Georgia, just one of the worst states. Like they just
Right.
banned our maternal health committee. It,
Yeah.
so anyway, so she tells her she's sorry. And then the next like 4 weeks actually was the calmest time until 41 from like 30, I guess, and a half or 37 and a half to like 41. It was like chill. But again, I had the belief that I would go to 42. I mean, I guess I guess in my head I thought I was gonna just go at 42, like 42 weeks. Pew. Um,
Hmm.
and that because I knew her stipulations were 42 weeks. So like I said, I thought I would just, I don't know. I just didn't think further ahead than that.
Right.
And also I heard a lot of stories of, midwives doing little things, like I said, for women. So I think along the way, I was just hoping, even though I had a lot of red flags and I was actively going to people, even in therapy, talking to my therapist about about this woman.
Hmm.
Um, I still thought there was like some level of like, I don't know, she'll bend her rules for me, which
Hmm.
was had not happened yet. But um, yeah. So I get to like 41 weeks, and that's when they have the talk like, okay, like something's gotta happen the next week. Let's make a plan. Um, and so I just basically do all kinds of things. I mean, herbs or like homeopathic stuff that they recommended, which did not work. I'm not saying I don't think it works. It just did not work for me.
Right.
Um, I will say, I guess one kind, I don't know if you call it homeopathic, probably not. We did a stretch and sweep. That's not what I was thinking. But after that, I did midwife's brew, which I'm
Okay.
more, I used to be like, oh, I did midwife's brew. Everyone should do that before. And I'm kind of just like, I don't know. I used to just be very pro. I'm more neutral, I guess, now
Yeah.
because I've read more stories. At the time I was very confident. I was like, oh yeah, and it did work for me. Work. But
Hmm.
the thing is like, I mean, the day the midwife did the stretch and sweep, she told me, which is the day before I went into like official labor, I think, or something like, I don't know, it's like within 2 days. I She told me, we don't play about VBACs, right? Like that is tattooed in my mind, and I wish it wasn't. But
Right.
like, what is that supposed to like? What is that supposed
Right.
to mean? And then I proceed to let her put her hands inside of me, and she was gentle and whatever. But it's just kind of like that's what causes this like CPTSD, like this complex trauma
Yeah.
with people because you're putting this trust into somebody, and society has taught us that we're supposed to. Okay, so
Absolutely.
you know and then I think with a lot of us, what the trauma part is that we don't like the decisions we're making a lot of the time. Sometimes we feel like we have no choice, or we feel like we have no one to support us. Like at that point, the only person I probably would have had to support me to birth at home without a midwife would be someone that lives states away. And even then, that is such a mindset. You have got to prepare mentally. Like it is so easy to just tell women like fire the midwife and stay home. And like I'm sure I've said that plenty of times to women, which I don't now. I've deleted the Facebook app because I can't stay out of the groups because it can get crazy. And it can make you be like mom mentality on some of these women. Like everyone's like, yeah. And like the one girl that says, fire the midwife and just stay home. It's like 68 likes. I'm like, wait, listen, I've been there. Like I have to take myself back. That takes so much time to prepare. And some women can just do it and some women can't. And I just remember telling myself, like, I have not prepared mentally to give birth without people. Like
Yeah.
I haven't. And I just was willing to just go through whatever she was going to put me through,
Hmm.
then do that. And I don't have regrets about it. I just hate that that was the circumstance.
Absolutely.
But so what ends up So yeah, we do the stretch and sweep, end up doing the, I did midwives for twice, actually, 'cause the first time I threw it up, but I end up, it works, and I end up going into labor like at 9 o'clock at night. And I was in active labor for 12 hours, and that was it. But it wasn't so like during my like the first, let's say like 11 hours, I guess. Um, it was just my doula, my husband, and the secondary midwife who was a student. Um, and the student midwife, while she contributed, she was much more like, you could tell she was, I don't want to say the puppet, that sounds so degrading, but like she was
Mm,
not the one doing, like she was very soft spoken, very like, I could tell she wanted to be my friend, but she definitely had to like, was in training.
yeah.
But she was the one with me, and I felt great with her there. And it wasn't until like 8 something in the morning. So I had my son at 9:47 a.m. And at 8 something in the morning, that midwife, I remember walking out the bathroom, and the main midwife is there. And I remember, I remember saying, "Oh, you're here." Like, not like, "Oh, you're here." Like, that's what you should, that's what the people that are at your birth, that is
Yeah.
how you should be like, "Oh, you're here." Like, that's how you want to feel.
Yes.
And you need to think about that early on. If you
Hmm.
do not feel that way every single, I mean, not every single, let's be honest, but because my husband, do I want to, there was times where I was like, I don't want you at my birth. But that's the, but I guess outside your spouse, like, is this someone that like, would I say it that way? No. And I think that's a really good vow or a vetting for who you want at your birth. Not even all the other questions. How would you respond? Because I remember saying, "Oh, you're here." Like saying it that way would just, oh gosh, I just don't even know how they responded. They probably were, who cares? But
Yeah.
this is this is where it just gets so stupid, because this is where it all goes downhill. Like everything had been fine. Things, I mean, everything was fine. But she gets me to take, I'm in transition. Okay. I just had a cervical check, and I was 7 centimeters. I was like in like I mean, not just cervically transition. Like I was like, in transition. I had not sat my whole labor. That labor, I mean, but all my labors, I've just had to be standing, swaying on my all fours the
Hmm.
whole 12 hours. Like or 11, until she got there. And then because of my stomach, because of the way my stomach hangs, when they would take the baby's heartbeat, the one time I would have to lay on my back was then. And I'm very like not anti-fetal heart rate monitoring, but evidence shows it doesn't make a difference in outcomes.
Right.
And this is what caused my cascade. Well, really the midwife being there causes the cascade, but so I had to lay down, but his heart rate had been fine. But once you're in transition, the baby's going down, your pelvis closes when you're on your back, on top of maternal stress, this woman being in my space. So what happens is I'm in transition. She asked me to take my blood sugar. I've never heard, and even I've just, the craziest stories, I've never heard someone being asked to take their blood sugar in transition after being in labor for, really, I was in prodromal labor for like 2 days after that cervical or membrane sweep stretch, all that. I was like having contractions every 10 minutes for like 2 days anyway. I just don't consider that like my labor.
Hmm.
So I had like not ate, I had not slept. And this female dog, I'm not going to say what I want to say. That's what I want. That's what goes on in my head. Is this
Right.
beast comes in
Yes.
my house and asks me to take my blood sugar. And I remember it being like 136, which had never, I mean, I've never had anything. I don't even know if that's high. Like, I don't even know, because mine were always like 99 to 105, like
Right.
after meals. Like, I don't know. But I remember like she's like, when I saw that number, I'm like, oh my God, I'm now out of my body thinking
Right.
about her.
Yeah.
And then she's like, okay, now we need to go take the baby's heartbeat. When I go take the baby's heartbeat, guess what? D cells. That's the
Mm.
first time in 12 hours, 11 hours. Also in that moment, like I said, transition, I don't even know if she was doing, the other midwife was doing the heart rate monitoring. Like, so I read they're supposed to do it every like 15 minutes. I don't even think she was doing it that often. So because once it was like once that other woman got here, I felt like it was like nonstop because
Mm.
my doula at the time made me like a birth report, kind of like with details of like what happened. And it says like I went through two contractions of them tracing the heartbeat, and the midwife decided to call the ambulance. So she stayed for two contractions and called the ambulance for just, I guess, fetal distress, which,
Interesting.
yeah. Um, and to top this off, she, first of all, so the secondary midwife that had been there all night, she's a lot younger, so we'll say the younger midwife. She goes in the ambulance with me, but because it's considered her birth. I didn't even know all this until later. It makes sense. She was there all night, but like that was her birth for training.
Hmm.
Um, which kind of negates the safety factor. Like, not that I didn't trust her, but I just think like if it's really about safety and you're really concerned about VBAC, wouldn't you want to be there too? I don't, whatever.
Right.
So the secondary midwife goes with me in the ambulance. My husband drives right behind. And I always, this is what I think about these days. It's like my poor husband was probably thinking. But um, then she, instead of calling the birth assistant who lives locally, that I paid $300 to have her come help clean, which there was nothing to clean. There was a birth pool that needed to be emptied. There was no blood. There was nothing to clean. She keeps my doula behind and makes her help clean up. So my doula ends up coming to the hospital, but she ends up missing my birth.
Oh, wow.
And the main midwife never comes to the hospital, doesn't text me, doesn't call me. She did come like at a postpartum visit. I don't even, not 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks later. I didn't even get my full 6 week thing that I paid for. I mean, what it's not about the money, but that was something that took like 2 years to be upset about that. I was like, you know what, honestly, she kind of does whatever. You kind of owe me, but whatever. I'm not even mad about it. But that was like that when that level, it was all, of course, all the things leading up to it, but then to not you keep the doula behind. So now my
Right.
doula misses my birth. Because when I get to the hospital, so let's talk about what happens after that.
Yeah.
Trauma dump, sorry. But no, for
No,
real,
no.
to make light of the situation. So I go from like being upright, all night to, because this was all throughout the middle of the night, to now I'm strapped in the back of an ambulance for 20 minutes to the hospital. And I remember like being in, I mean, that every time I would get down, like I said, to do the laying for the contractions and monitoring, I mean, it didn't just, I try not to sound dramatic, but like it didn't just hurt, but it literally feels like my bones were breaking or something. I know that's not what's
Mm.
happening, but my body, it's like your body is screaming at you. This is like you are gonna die if you stay like this. I know that's not what would happen, but my signals, that's what was signaling to me, right? And
Right.
so I had to deal with that in transition the last 20, 30 minutes before my son's born, with people trying to poke IV, just ask me. They were asking, I know they have to, but they're asking the stupidest questions, like the ambulance people. I can't even remember. And I remember the reason I meant to, I'm going to jump back for a second, the gestational diabetes thing. The reason I brought up earlier, I was like, they never told me I was gestational diabetic, but they made me do all that stuff. When it came to time to induce, I remember telling them, like, do all the things, take castor and all this stuff. I remember telling them, I said, I won't go to the hospital. Like, I was for sure, I was like, I won't do Pitocin. That's my boundary. I'm not doing that. And they said, well, like, and that was the first thing. And then I was like, and I really don't want to do anything to induce at all. And that's when
Mhm.
they said, well, with the gestational diabetes. And I looked at him. I remember looking like, I'm not gestational diabetic. And then they kind of looked at each other, and it was just like, ugh, like you could just tell that it
Mm.
was just kind of like, are you, like, you don't think you're just, and it's like, and they didn't put
Wow.
that on any of my paperwork and stuff, but this is just had a flashback in the
Hmm.
ambulance. I remember her saying something to them, I think that like, she's gestational diabetic. And I remember screaming, I'm not gestational diabetic, or something
Oh,
like that. Like,
man.
like it's something, it's just so silly, right?
Mm.
At that point, I was totally yelling at people. I don't really, I don't care. We get to the hospital. Um, if it would have been any other doctor on call, I would have got a C-section. Thank just by my stars, I didn't. I had while female OBGYNs have their own things too. Those were the females. Actually, one of the females that told me the abdomen thing, the baby floating, she was in my birth. She attended my birth because it was the same system. She was
Right.
the chiller one. She was the nicer one about it, I guess. But so females have their own issues, but I did have a mostly female team, and I think that might have made a difference. I don't know, but I it just yeah, without getting into all the details, the craziness. I will say having a VBAC up, whether it be at the hospital or wherever, I was grateful I had my VBAC. It was redemptive in many ways, but I was once again like in the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
naked in front of they had the NICU. They had, this is a fetal distress. This is a 42-week obese home birth transfer. Oh my gosh, the whole hospital is in review.
Right.
Like I was, and I a way to cope with it actually. mm, I mean, I had, like I said, knew all these red flags, knew all these things, but I coped with it by like, that was so Hollywood. Like I was like, let me just focus on what I can focus on. That was just
Yeah.
so Hollywood. And it was like a movie. Oh my gosh. And it really was. I mean, totally like a scene out of a movie. I feel like I've seen my birth play on the show before,
Wow.
um, but yeah, it's that one hurt just different because I had this image, and there are still many great midwives like there are OBGYNs, but many they again the licensure, the even the schooling they're going through now, a lot of
Yeah.
people are saying is changing and they're not liking it. And just from my experience, um, I guess I thought it was gonna be like a bestie. And some people
Right.
do, and I envy it, and I envy it in a loving way. I'm like, oh, I'm so happy for you. Like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, thank God. Like, thank God, But um, I thought that was going to be what it was. I spent hours with these people, and I was just abandoned, and that hurt.
Yeah.
And so then I went into my radical moment of like, F everybody. Um, uh, it was really, yeah, because I was like, not just birth trauma, but it felt like during the birth of like the details of what happened during the birth. Because I ended up dealing with like a uterine prolapse or like I don't know, whatever one. There's just tons of different ones, but um, and stuff like that. Uh,
After
and so
your
like even
VBAC.
post, yeah. And I had like a second degree tear and stuff like that. So after a C-section, while like, yeah, I had the scarring and like it got infected on the outside, and that was a whole thing. This time, like my vagina's, and not even like, I think if it wouldn't have been so traumatic with the people, that probably wouldn't even have been as bad, right? Like I probably wouldn't have, if I would have had a midwife to go talk to about it, to be like, hey, I'm dealing with this I didn't have no one to talk to about this prolapse. I felt uncomfortable having sex. Like, it just, and I don't know, 25. It's just not something you think, that's just another thing you just don't think you're going to deal with. But so recovery from that, while I would say in many ways more optimal than a C-section, was still really hard. Um, and so I know I've been talking for a really, really long time, but
That's
I don't
okay.
know if I can go into my third birth.
Let's do it.
Okay, so
Sorry to leave you hanging, but I am definitely leaving you hanging. You are going to have to wait until next week to hear the rest of that episode. I mean, Lizzie's story, I feel like is so common, unfortunately, where she experiences trauma and then she decides that she is done with the trauma and then she goes on and has different type of trauma even though she had a VBAC. So, I just want you to realize that it is still possible for you to experience trauma, but there are things that you can do to try to combat that. So, anyways, that's why I do have this podcast, because I feel like it's so important for you to see the different sides of VBAC, That way you can get insight from somebody else's journey and you can apply it to your own journey in whatever way that feels right to you. So you are going to wait till next week to hear Lizzy's free birth story. And I got to tell you, it is worth the wait. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week. I hope you loved that episode as much as I loved creating it. And if you want to learn more, be sure to download your free VBAC resource guide for even more tips and advice at birthingcometrue.com/VBAC guide. And don't forget to subscribe to the Journey to VBAC so you never miss an episode. Until next time, trust in yourself and remember, you are amazing no matter how your birth unfolds. Bye for now.